Good morning, Foreign Secretary. Good to
Good
see
morning.
you. Thank you for taking the time. How do you think it went last night?
I thought it was a tough crowd for both of them. The standout moment for me was Keir Starmer being asked, why did you say Corbyn would be a great Prime Minister? And him repeatedly saying, well, I'd never thought we were going to win the election. You sort of think, hold on, why not either say it was wrong to say he was a great Prime Minister? Because otherwise people are left thinking, well, if you were misleading us then, what are you misleading us about now? I thought that was a standout moment. I thought Rishi did very well. I mean, it's a tough crowd, but he gives a very good account of himself. He's got all the policy detail, all the knowledge about what's happening in our health service and beyond, and I thought he did a good job.
You're rearranging the deck chairs, though, aren't you?
It's a tough... fighting election after 14 years in office is difficult, and the last few years have been difficult because we've had these twin icebergs, really, of COVID and of the Ukraine war that put up inflation to over 11%. And Rishi's test, really, was can you get inflation down and get the economy growing again? And he's passed that test. And I think that's one of the things people should focus on in the last couple of years. And now it's about who do you want for the future? Who's got the plan? Who's got the team? And I think we've got a very strong offer there.
Your colleagues are talking about supermajorities, reports that officials across the road are preparing for a 400-seat change. How bad is it going to be?
Well, my view is that any time you spend in an election campaign talking about the outcome of that campaign when you don't know what it's going to be, or indeed talking about polls when you don't know whether they're right or wrong, is sort of wasted time. Better to spend the time comparing the plans, comparing the leaders, comparing the teams, asking, who's got the plan to keep Britain safe and keep us prosperous. Because to me, that's what it's all about. It's about security and prosperity. And you've got, with Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives, the plan to increase the defence spending, the plan to reduce taxes, the plan to grow the economy, the plan to get 100,000 more young people into apprenticeships. I mean, I've been quite struck, actually. I mean, I'm not writing this campaign, I'm a part of the campaign, but I've been quite struck that every day the Conservatives have come forward with some very exciting plans, whether it's national service, whether it's taking the pension out of tax, whether it's cutting stamp duty for first-time buyers. This is not a party that's run out of ideas.
And then he leaves people on the beach in Normandy and comes back to do a television interview.
Well, he has said that he wished he had stayed. But to be fair...
Tell me about the conversation you had with him.
Well, I'm not going to do that because I'm part of a team. And
Did you try and tell him not to?
I'm not getting into
Sunday Times says you did.
What I would say is those stories you read in the newspapers where, I was apoplectic. I absolutely wasn't at all. It's often sort of third-person hearsay ends up in these newspaper columns. Look, he had to make a decision. Prime Ministers have to make decisions all the time. He did the key event in Portsmouth, did it brilliantly, and it was a magnificent event. He did the key event above the British D-Day beaches in Normandy at our new commemorative centre, which is a wonderful spot.
You're not
He did that brilliantly. No, he did that job brilliantly. And then he made the long-standing decision to go back to the UK, and immediately
he said... It wasn't a long-standing decision. He only called the election a couple of weeks before.
No, but he wasn't planning to stay beyond that event.
Well,
as soon as he gets back, he says, I made a mistake. I wish I'd stayed longer. And I think that's a credit.
What did you say to President Biden?
So what happened, to put you in the picture, there wasn't some sort of event that I was present at the American and French-led event. I didn't, actually. Grant Shapps was deputising. I was there, and Macron...
That's not a good thing, that he was deputising. At least if you were a former Prime Minister,
President
you had
Macron
more stature.
it was a MOD. It's a complicated story.
Yeah, anyway, I think we should leave it.
But President Macron asked to have a word with me, so I went forward to have a chat with him, and he said, let's have a quad photo, and that's, Germany, France, Britain, America. It wasn't an event I was at with the other three leaders. It was a photograph. And we talked about... God, I can't remember what we talked about. We talked about probably what was going on.
Did anybody say, where's Rishi?
No.
Are you sure?
Yes.
OK. But people, in all seriousness, want to know about taxes. That's what they want to know about. There's these big gaffes that we've seen the Prime Minister. He looked totally crestfallen yesterday. However you want to describe it, he did. He looked as though he didn't want to be there anymore. But he continues to tell us that taxes will go down if you win the next election. And that's what Grant Shapps, we're just talking about him, told me yesterday. That's not the case. They will go up if you win the next election.
Well, what's going to happen if we win the election is we're going to cut national insurance by another 2%. We're going to get rid of national insurance for self-employed people. We're going to cut the tax on stamp duty for buying a house to push it to it's over 400,000 before you start paying it, and we're going to keep the people on the basic state pension, which is rising quite rightly. We're going to make sure that isn't taxed. Now, those are bankable tax cuts from a Conservative government, which we fully costed in our manifesto, paid for by dealing with tax avoidance, which we've done every year. We've raised something like £6 billion from cracking down on tax avoidance, and from welfare reform, where, you know, it's only quite a modest sum we're hoping to raise compared with the needs. Now, there's a contrast between those tax reductions and Labour's plans, which involve a lot of tax increases, but they're not telling us about them.
But taxes will go up under a future Conservative government.
No, what's going to happen
They will.
What is going to happen is we're going to cut those key tax rates, and that will make a difference to
The tax burden will be higher.
Well, the point about you can always get.
Can you at least acknowledge that?
Well, you can always get the tax burden down by simply borrowing more. But the key question is: are you going to control public spending in a way that's going to enable you to reduce tax rates? We are. Labour aren't.
Yeah, but the tax burden will increase under a Conservative government should you win the next election.
So what is going to happen is tax rates are going to come down. As I say, the thing to look at is the overall burden of taxation and borrowing. You can always change the tax burden by increasing borrowing, but we're saying, no, we must make sure that the debt to GDP ratio is falling. And why that's so important in many ways is that is your insurance against future disasters and difficulties. So the fact that my government managed to reduce the deficit from almost 11% down to 3% meant that we could start shrinking our debt burden as a share of our GDP. And that meant when COVID hit, we had the financial capacity to deal with the crisis. And this government wants to do the same.
Reform 1 point behind in the polls. Nigel Farage has been a thorn in your side for a long time.
Well, look, what I would say, first of all, on the opinion polls, as I've said, let's not waste our time talking about those. But the crucial fact is, if you're a reform voter or a potential reform voter, I suspect what you want is you want lower taxes, you want lower immigration, and you want strong defences in a dangerous world. You'll get all of those things with a Conservative government. You'll get none of them with a Labour government. And yet, if you vote for reform, you're more likely to get Keir Starmer in Downing Street. Because there are only two people, ultimately, that can walk up that street and form the government after the next election. And that's Sunak and Starmer.
He is a thorn in your side, though, isn't he?
Well, look, anyone who's not standing for the Conservatives is a thorn in my side, because I want us to win.
How many times over the last, 10 years or so, have you woken up in the middle of the night and looked at yourself in the mirror and thought, I wish I'd said 2/3 majority on that referendum?
Look, that's not the way we do things
in
the UK. No, look, we made a promise.
You did, you have, haven't you?
No. I think I made a promise in 2015. Well, I actually made a promise in 2013, 2 years before the election.
Yeah.
I said we were going to have a renegotiation and a referendum to deal with this issue. I kept that promise. I think it's important politicians do keep their promises. I campaigned as hard as I could on the side to stay in, and I lost, and that's why I resigned.
What do you promise to do after the 5th of July?
What I promise to do after the 5th of July, if the Prime Minister will have me, is to carry on as Foreign Secretary in a very difficult,
I don't think Keir Starmer wants you.
Insecure. Well, no, I said if the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, wants me. I'm sure Keir Starmer doesn't want me. But I'm fighting for us to win this election and to continue as Foreign Secretary in a very dangerous and difficult world.
Yeah, and if the Conservatives lose, what will you do? What's the plan?
If my mother had wheels, she'd be a bicycle. I don't answer questions beginning with the word if.
I did offer to write Mel Stride's CV for him earlier in the week. I mean...
Well, that's very thoughtful of you. But,
but it won't be necessary.
Look, we've got 21 days to go. I know from the 2015 election that you fight for every vote, you fight for every seat, and the people decide. That's the way it works. It's not the commentators, it's not me, it's not you, it's not the polls, it's not John Curtis even. Ultimately, the people decide, and they've got a choice. And it's not a referendum on the government, it's a choice between two competing visions.
Yeah,
and I think we've got a good leader, we've got a good team.
He was broken yesterday.
I don't accept that. I watched it. I watched it. Those are tough questions, but I thought actually particularly that question on the health service when he was talking about his own experience, about pharmacies, about what was available in Grimsby, about the modernisation of healthcare. This is, you see it in Cabinet. I mean, he is absolutely on top of his game.
But I've grilled you lots of times in that format. Over the years, I've known you a long time, and you don't, your head has always been up. You've always, whatever you thought about afterwards, you've always been on it. Whereas he didn't. He looked.
I think you're over-interpreting that. I was watching. I was sitting at home watching on television, and
me.
I saw someone who was totally in command of the detail and the brief. And that's what you see, when you go to Cabinet, and it's interesting watching someone else chair the Cabinet. He is always the best brief person in the room. He's read everything, he's understood everything, and he's got good values. And I thought that also came across last night. It is, if you think about it, an extraordinary story. His parents came to this country, and in one generation, he's Prime Minister of our country. That's an extraordinary story about him and his family. It's also an extraordinary story about our democracy and about look, we've still got lots of problems of racism and difficulties and blocked opportunities, but we are building a meritocratic, democratic country in a quite remarkable way.
What did his parents do? I'm kidding. We know. He tells us all the time. As does Keir Starmer, to be fair, and his. So you're not giving up?
No, I'm never giving up. And as I say, I really enjoyed being part of this team. He's a very effective leader. I think we have a good team too. I think, Jeremy Hunt's been a very effective Chancellor. James Cleverly, excellent Home Secretary. I've tried to do my best at the Foreign Office, keeping us safe in this dangerous world. And as I say, normally at the end of 14 years, you might be running out of ideas. There's plenty of petrol in the tank. And there's also a huge amount of exciting ideas coming out in our manifesto.
OK, I've got to let you go because we're massively overrunning. But, this guy who's standing, Craig Williams, who's the aide, who put a bet on for when the election should be, having been in close conversations with the Prime Minister. That's not on, is it?
It's not on, very foolish, but he is now being investigated by the Gambling Commission. I think we need to let them do their work. They have considerable powers. He's also got another investigation in front of his electorate, and he'll have to justify himself to them. But let's let the Gambling Commission do their work.
OK, it's good to talk to you as always.